I was 28, but some days I felt so much older. Life had been pulling me in directions I didn't choose, wearing me down little by little until I hardly recognized myself in the mirror. My friends still described me as young, beautiful, full of potential, but behind my smile there was only exhaustion. A long relationship had ended months ago, and though I told everyone it was mutual, the truth was far heavier. I had loved him in the way a young woman loves for the first time, with all of herself, with no thought of boundaries. But he loved me only until something shinier caught his eye. By the time he left, he had drained me of my laughter, my trust, my belief in permanence. Even after he was gone, his absence stayed like a shadow in every room. I went to work, I made small talk, I even joined friends on weekends, but inside I was numb. There was no joy in the conversations, no excitement in the plans. Everything felt like I was moving through fog. And at night, when silence surrounded me, the loneliness pressed so heavily on my chest that sometimes I would wake up in tears, not even remembering when I started crying. It was one of those nights when the decision came. I was sitting by the window in my apartment, staring at the endless trail of car lights on the road below, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. Not the routines, not the pretending, not the walls of this city that had witnessed too much of my pain. I needed space, real, open space where silence wasn't suffocating but healing. Somewhere the air could fill my lungs with something other than disappointment. Somewhere I could hear myself again. That's how the idea of a long trip came. I didn't want beaches crowded with tourists or glamorous resorts. I wanted roads that stretched into valleys, mountains that stood like guardians of peace, rivers that sang only to themselves. I wanted solitude, but not the kind that hurt. The kind that whispered gently, reminding me that the world was larger than heartbreak, larger than betrayal. So I packed lightly, a backpack with essentials, a notebook I hadn't dared open in months, and a camera that still held dust from the last time I had cared enough to capture something beautiful. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going. I just said I needed a break, and for once, I didn't feel guilty about disappearing. The first morning of my journey was quiet, the sky painted in soft blush, as the city slowly woke behind me. I rolled down the window of my car, and let the wind tangle my hair, let it carry away pieces of the heaviness. Mile by mile, the buildings thinned, the noise faded, and the air began to change. By afternoon, the flat roads gave way to curves that wound into the hills. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks softened by mist. Green valleys opened like vast secrets, scattered with tiny houses that looked as though they had grown from the earth itself. For the first time in months, my chest expanded fully, and I caught myself smiling, an unplanned, fragile smile, but real. I stopped at a viewpoint where the land dropped into a deep gorge. Below, a river rushed with unrestrained energy, its sound echoing up to where I stood. The water seemed alive, wild, unbothered by anything but its own freedom. I sat on a rock, pulled out my notebook, and let my hand hover over the page. No words came, but the silence around me wasn't empty. It was full of movement, of whispers from the trees, of the rhythm of nature reminding me that life went on, always. As the days unfolded, the road became my companion. Some stretches were long and lonely, nothing but endless asphalt cutting through fields of golden grass. Other times I drove through villages where children waved at my car, their laughter echoing behind me. I spent nights in small roadside inns, where I fell asleep to the sound of crickets or rain tapping gently against the roof. Each morning, I woke before sunrise, eager to chase the horizon. There was something cleansing in watching the world awaken in places where no one knew me, no one expected me to be strong or put together. I could just be, a woman traveling alone, searching for fragments of herself scattered across the landscapes. Yet, even in the beauty of the journey, a quiet ache remained inside me. Peace was close, but not complete. I carried my memories like hidden luggage, too heavy to discard in one go. Sometimes, While driving under the wide expanse of stars, I would think of him again, and tears would blur the road. But then, the moon would break through the clouds, or a deer would cross gracefully into the forest, and I would remember, there was more to live for than what I had lost. I didn't know what waited for me ahead. I only knew that with every mile, I was peeling away another layer of grief, allowing the possibility of something new to slip quietly into my heart. I wasn't searching for anyone, not love, not companionship. I only wanted peace, the kind that holds you gently until you are whole again. But life, I would soon learn, doesn't always give us what we ask for. Sometimes it gives us what we need, disguised in the most unexpected form, waiting just beyond the next bend in the road. It was close to midnight, when the road narrowed into a stretch that seemed forgotten by time. My headlights cut through the darkness, chasing shadows into the trees. I had driven longer than I planned, carried forward by some restless energy, as though the silence of night could bury the noise inside my chest. The villages had thinned, the traffic disappeared, and for a while I thought I was the only person left on Earth. Then, in the distance, I saw a flicker of orange light, a checkpoint. A small post stood at the side of the road, its weak bulbs attracting moths that fluttered desperately around them. A barrier arm stretched across the road, forcing me to slow. For a moment, my stomach tightened. I hadn't done anything wrong, but being stopped at night on an isolated road made me uneasy. I pulled over, rolled down my window, and waited. From the shadows, she appeared. A tall figure in uniform, her steps purposeful, her presence commanding. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another officer doing her duty. But as she came closer and the light caught her face, something shifted. She was striking in a way that caught me off guard, sharp eyes that missed nothing, lips pressed into a line of authority, and a composure that seemed carved into her very being. She couldn't have been much older than me, maybe early 30s, but there was a weight in her gaze that made me straighten unconsciously. "Good evening," she said, her tone clipped, professional. "License and registration, please." I fumbled slightly as I handed her the documents, trying to ignore the nervous flutter that rose in my chest. She studied them, then me, her eyes lingering a fraction longer than necessary. "Traveling alone this late?" she asked, not unkindly, but with an edge that suggested she was already cataloguing details, weighing possibilities. "Yes," I replied. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. "I'm on a trip. Just needed some time away." She didn't nod, didn't soften. Instead, she walked around my car, inspecting it with the patience of someone who never rushed their work. The silence stretched until she returned to my window. "I'll need to conduct a search," she said firmly. "Routine procedure." Her words sent a shiver through me. I had passed through checkpoints before, but rarely had I been subjected to anything beyond a cursory glance. Something about her insistence felt different, unyielding. I wanted to protest, to tell her it wasn't necessary, but the authority in her tone left no space for refusal. I stepped out of the car, my pulse quickening. The night air was cool, brushing against my skin, as I stood under the harsh glow of the checkpoint light. She directed me with gestures rather than words, each movement precise, efficient. Yet, beneath the professionalism, I felt an intensity. Her eyes never strayed, her attention unwavering. As she checked my bag, her fingers moved with deliberate care, unfolding clothes, examining even the smallest items. It was thorough, almost too thorough, as if she wasn't just searching for contraband but for pieces of me. I stood silently, watching her, and with every second my nervousness mingled with something else I couldn't name, curiosity, perhaps, or the strange comfort of being seen so completely, even in a way I didn't fully understand. When she finally turned back to me, she stepped closer than I expected. The air between us grew tight, charged. Her gaze met mine, steady and unreadable. "Traveling alone at night can be dangerous," she said, her voice softer now, almost personal. "Be careful where you stop. Not everyone you meet will be as professional as I am." Her words lingered longer than they should have, carrying a weight I couldn't quite unravel. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining it, the slight shift in her tone, the pause before the word professional. But something in her eyes told me it wasn't entirely my imagination. I nodded, my throat dry. "Thank you, officer." She gave a curt nod in return, then stepped back, signaling that I was free to go. I slid into my car, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the wheel. But before I drove away, I glanced at her through the window. She was watching me still, her expression unreadable, her figure outlined against the dim glow of the checkpoint. As the barrier lifted and I drove into the darkness, my heart pounded not from fear, but from something far more unsettling. I couldn't stop replaying the way her eyes had lingered, the deliberate patience in her touch, the subtle break in her composure when she spoke to me. It was supposed to be just another checkpoint on a lonely road. But as the night swallowed me again, I knew it wasn't. Something had shifted. Something unspoken had passed between us, delicate yet undeniable. And though I told myself not to think too much of it, deep down, I knew I would. The barrier had lifted, and I could have just driven away, but something in her tone, something in the way her eyes had held mine, kept me rooted. I didn't start the engine right away. My hesitation must have caught her attention, because she walked back to my car, her boots crunching lightly against the gravel. "Step out again," she said, her voice steady, though not cold. "I need to be thorough. Just a few more checks." The air seemed to thicken around me. I obeyed without a word, pushing the door open and stepping into the dim glow of the checkpoint lights. The night was still, except for the faint hum of crickets in the distance. My pulse quickened, echoing louder in my ears than the quiet around us. She moved closer, her presence commanding, but her gaze was not the detached, professional sweep of an officer on duty. It lingered. It studied me, not just my belongings. "Arms out," she instructed softly. I lifted my arms, trying to steady my breathing. Her hands, firm but deliberate, began the search. She started with the outer layers, my jacket pockets, the curve of my arms, the line of my shoulders. But it was the way she moved, unhurried, almost cautious, that unsettled me. Her touch wasn't careless or mechanical, it carried a strange precision, as if she was memorizing the shape of me rather than just checking for something hidden. When her hands brushed against my sides, I felt the muscles in my body tighten involuntarily. I wasn't used to being touched by strangers, and certainly not like this. Yet there was no violation in her manner, no aggression. Instead, there was an undercurrent of care, something that confused me even more. She crouched briefly, checking around my ankles, then rose again, her eyes never leaving mine for too long. Each time her gaze returned, I felt pinned in place, as though she was trying to read something behind my composure. "You're tense," she murmured, almost to herself. I swallowed. "Wouldn't you be?" The corner of her mouth twitched, just the faintest ghost of a smile, but it disappeared before it could form. She continued her search, her fingers brushing against my wrists, the small of my back, my waist. I couldn't tell if it was intentional or simply the necessity of her duty, but the electricity it sparked in me was undeniable. And then there was the silence. She said so little, but the quiet was filled with meaning. It wasn't the silence of indifference, it was charged, layered. Every second stretched longer than it should, every touch lingered a fraction more than required. Inside, I battled conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to retreat, to put distance between us and reclaim the space that felt suddenly too intimate. But another part of me, one I didn't fully recognize, wanted her closeness, wanted the steadiness of her hands, the intensity of her attention. It had been so long since anyone had looked at me like that, with focus that went beyond the surface. When she finished, she stepped back just slightly, though her nearness still hung in the air. She scanned my face as if expecting a reaction, as if the silence between us demanded to be acknowledged. Nothing suspicious, she finally said, her voice softer now. You can relax. But I didn't feel relaxed. If anything, my heart was racing faster, my thoughts tangled in questions I couldn't ask. Why did it feel different? Why did it feel personal? I forced a shaky smile. That was very thorough. Her eyes flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw something unspoken there, a spark, quickly hidden. She adjusted her cap, reclaiming the crisp authority of her uniform. I told you. Traveling alone at night can be dangerous. Sometimes people don't realize how vulnerable they are until it's too late. The way she said vulnerable sent another ripple through me. She wasn't just talking about the road, or about strangers. It felt like she was speaking directly to me, to the guarded parts of myself I hadn't shared with anyone. She gestured toward my car. You're free to go. But, she hesitated. Be careful. These roads are unpredictable. Not everyone has good intentions. I nodded, though my throat felt tight. Thank you, officer. Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to say something more, but instead she gave a curt nod and stepped back. I slid into the driver's seat again, my fingers trembling against the wheel. When I glanced through the window, she was still there, watching me, her figure silhouetted against the weak light of the post. Her gaze followed me as I started the engine, as if she was reluctant to let me go. As the road opened again before me, I tried to shake off the encounter, to convince myself it was nothing more than protocol. But deep down, I knew better. That wasn't a search I would forget. It wasn't just the touch of her hands or the firmness of her voice, it was the unspoken current between us, a tension that defied explanation. Something about her had left an imprint, subtle yet indelible. I felt unsettled, but not in the way fear unsettles. It was different, like standing at the edge of a precipice, not sure if I was meant to step back or to leap. The night stretched before me, endless and quiet, but her presence lingered inside me like a hidden flame. I had come on this trip seeking silence and peace, but instead, I found myself haunted by the memory of a woman whose search had gone far beyond rules, into a place I didn't yet have words for. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of roads and landscapes, but no matter how far I drove, I couldn't escape her presence. At night, when I lay in small, unfamiliar inns, I replayed the memory of her hands, the way her eyes had lingered, the softness that had cracked through her authority in that fleeting moment. It was ridiculous, I told myself. She was just an officer doing her job. But then why did I feel as though her gaze had followed me, even into my dreams? I tried to drown the thoughts in distractions, photographing the misty mountains at dawn, scribbling half-finished sentences in my notebook, listening to music as the valleys rushed past my window. But inevitably, the silence between songs carried me back to her, to the stillness of that checkpoint, to the strange mixture of safety and tension I had felt in her presence. 3 days later, I stopped in a small town nestled between rolling hills. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but I liked it. Cobblestone streets lined with faded houses, children chasing each other barefoot, the smell of bread drifting from a bakery nearby, it felt timeless, untouched by the chaos I had left behind. I decided to rest there for the afternoon and found a little cafe tucked beside the marketplace. It was unassuming, with wooden chairs and potted plants by the window, the kind of place where time seemed to slow. I ordered tea, opened my notebook, and tried to write. The door creaked open, and instinctively I glanced up. My breath caught. It was her. She stepped inside, dressed not in uniform this time, but in plain clothes, dark jeans, a simple blouse, her hair tied back loosely. Without the sharp lines of her uniform, she looked almost softer, more human, though no less striking. For a second, I froze, unsure whether to acknowledge her or pretend not to notice. But then her eyes scanned the room, and they landed on me. Recognition flickered instantly. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, so subtle I might have missed it if I wasn't watching so closely. She approached, her steps measured, as though testing invisible ground between us. "Traveling far, I see," she said, her voice carrying that same steadiness, though lighter than before. I set my pen down, trying to steady the sudden rush in my chest. "I didn't expect to see you again." "Neither did I." Her eyes softened, and for a moment the professional mask she had worn at the checkpoint seemed to slip away. "May I?" She gestured to the chair opposite me. I nodded. She sat, folding her hands neatly on the table. In the daylight, I could see her more clearly, the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet control, like someone used to being both respected and obeyed. Yet there was warmth beneath it, an undercurrent I had sensed before but now could name. "I didn't get your name that night," she said after a pause. "Sophia," I replied. "And yours?" "Anaya," she said. The name lingered on her tongue like something deliberate, as if giving it to me was more than a formality. We spoke cautiously at first, about the town, the quiet roads, the simplicity of traveling alone. She asked where I had been, where I was headed. I returned the questions, and slowly, fragments of her life slipped through the cracks. She had grown up in a nearby city, joined the police force young, and had been stationed in this district for the past 3 years. She didn't speak much about family, only hinting that duty often kept her distant. As she talked, I noticed the way her eyes searched mine, not in interrogation, but in curiosity. The sternness I had first encountered was gone, replaced by something almost tender. At one point, silence settled between us, comfortable this time. She glanced at my notebook. "Do you write?" "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly when I'm trying to untangle my thoughts." Her gaze lingered, thoughtful. "That's a brave thing, to face your own thoughts on paper." I laughed softly. "It doesn't always feel brave. Sometimes it feels like tearing open wounds." She nodded, as though she understood perfectly. And maybe she did. By the time the tea in my cup had gone cold, I realized hours had passed. Our small talk had grown into something deeper, shared glances, pauses filled with meaning. It wasn't anything overt, but there was a pull, undeniable and steady, drawing us closer with every word. When we finally stood to leave, the marketplace was glowing with the golden hues of late afternoon. She walked with me to my car, her pace unhurried. At the door, she hesitated, her hand resting lightly against the frame. "Be careful on the roads," she said again, softer this time, almost intimate. I smiled faintly. "You've told me that before." Her lips curved, and for a moment she looked as though she might say more, but she only nodded. "Some things are worth repeating." As I drove away, the town fading in my rearview mirror, my thoughts circled not around the mountains or the valleys, but around her, Anaya. What had begun as a tense encounter at a checkpoint was unraveling into something else, something unexpected and dangerously tender. I didn't leave the town right away. Something in me resisted the idea of putting distance between us so quickly, as if my journey had suddenly gained a new direction, one that no map could capture. I told myself I wanted to rest, to give my body a break from the endless driving, but deep down, I knew it was because of her. The next evening, I wandered through the quiet streets again, stopping near the river that cut through the town. The water shimmered with the reflection of the moon, its gentle rush filling the silence around me. I had just sat on the edge of the embankment when I heard footsteps approaching. "You like this spot too?" Anaya's voice came softly from behind. I turned, and there she was, in plain clothes again. No badge, no uniform, just a woman framed by the night, her expression carrying a quiet ease. "I do," I said, shifting to make room. She sat beside me, close but not too close, leaving just enough space for air, for possibility. For a while, neither of us spoke. The sound of the river seemed to do all the talking, and the silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was almost soothing. Still, something in me stirred restlessly, words I had been carrying for too long pressing against the walls of my chest. "I came here because I couldn't breathe anymore," I blurted out, surprising even myself. She turned her head, her dark eyes catching the silver glow of moonlight. I drew a deep breath, letting the truth unravel. Back home, everything felt heavy. I was in a relationship for years, and I gave so much of myself away that when it ended, there was nothing left of me. I tried to move on, to pretend, but the silence in my life was louder than anything. I thought maybe if I left, if I drove far enough, I'd find peace somewhere between the mountains and the rivers. I paused, swallowing hard. I guess I wanted to disappear for a while, but also to be found. The words trembled in the air, fragile, but freeing. She listened without interruption, her gaze steady, as though my confession was not a burden, but something she was ready to carry with me. When I finally looked away, embarrassed by the rawness of my voice, she exhaled slowly. "You're not alone in that feeling," she said quietly. I turned back to her. "What do you mean?" Her expression shifted, the faintest crack in her composure. "I've worn this uniform for almost a decade. People look at me and see authority, discipline, certainty. But they don't see the weight that comes with it. The expectations. The hours spent in solitude, standing guard while life happens elsewhere. I've watched people come and go, families passing by, friends building their lives. And I stayed. Duty first. Always duty." Her voice softened, carrying an ache that resonated with my own. "Sometimes, when the shift ends and the roads are empty, I wonder if anyone will ever look past the badge. If anyone will see me, not the officer, not the mask, but the woman underneath." The vulnerability in her words startled me. It was as though she had peeled away her armor just for me, exposing the same loneliness that haunted my nights. And in that moment, I saw her, not just as the stern officer who had stopped me at a checkpoint, but as someone who, like me, was aching for connection, for understanding. I reached out without thinking, my fingers brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand slightly, allowing my touch to settle, her palm warm against mine. We sat like that, our hands linked loosely, the silence between us now a bridge instead of a gap. The river continued to whisper, and for a long time we said nothing. But in the quiet, everything was being said. The press of her hand against mine told me she understood my pain, and her stillness told me she trusted me with hers. When she finally spoke again, her voice was low, almost hesitant. "The night I searched you, I wasn't only doing my job. I told myself it was protocol, but there was something about you. The way you looked at me, it felt like you were holding something inside, something I couldn't walk away from without trying to see more." Her words sent a shiver through me. "I thought I imagined it," I whispered. "You didn't." I turned fully toward her, our hands still entwined. Her face was so close now, the lines softened by the glow of moonlight, her eyes searching mine with a tenderness that hadn't been there before. The world seemed to narrow until it was only her and me, our breaths mingling in the space between us. I didn't know if I was brave or foolish, but I didn't look away. For the first time in a long time, I let myself be seen, not the broken, guarded version of me, but the woman who still longed, who still believed in the possibility of being loved again. We didn't kiss, not yet. But the moment was charged with the weight of it, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Instead, we stayed like that, our hands clasped, our gazes locked, our hearts speaking a language neither of us dared put into words. When we finally rose to leave, the air felt lighter, as though some invisible burden had been lifted from us both. She walked me back to the inn, her hand brushing against mine now and then, each touch a promise of something unnamed but undeniable. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't feel the familiar ache of loneliness pressing down on me. Instead, I felt the warmth of her hand still lingering in mine, and for the first time in months, I fell asleep with a quiet smile. The days that followed felt suspended in a fragile kind of beauty. Every glance, every accidental brush of fingers, every unspoken pause between us was like the beginning of something I didn't want to name out loud for fear it might vanish. Anaya and I met in quiet places, the riverside, the little cafe tucked away on the corner, once even on the trail leading up the hill where the view stretched farther than the eye could hold. But beauty has a way of making you forget how delicate it is. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I had wandered into the town square to pick up some fruit for the road. The air was thick with the scent of ripe peaches, and I was half lost in the rhythm of the market when I noticed a sharp change in the air around me. Whispers floated through the crowd, heads turning toward a figure standing not too far away. Anaya. But not the Anaya I had grown used to in our late-night conversations. This was Anaya in full uniform, her posture rigid, her face unreadable. Beside her stood an older man and a woman, her parents, I realized with a sudden jolt. They looked dignified, traditional, carrying themselves with the kind of authority that left no room for resistance. I slowed, instinctively pulling back into the crowd, hoping she wouldn't notice me. But before I could disappear, her mother's words cut through the air, clear and sharp. You cannot keep delaying this, Anaya. People are beginning to talk. Her father added firmly, duty is duty. Family comes before whims. Anaya's jaw tightened, her eyes flickering with something like pain before she caught herself. She responded in a clipped tone I barely recognized, I know. I haven't forgotten. I don't know what stung more, the icy formality of her voice or the way she didn't once glance my way, even though I was standing close enough to see the storm in her eyes. I left before she could. That night, when she came to find me by the river, I couldn't hold the questions back. Who were they? My voice shook despite my effort to stay calm. She froze. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked trapped. My parents, she said finally. They have certain expectations of me. Expectations? I repeated, my chest tightening. What does that even mean? Her silence was its own answer, but I pushed anyway. All this time, Anaya, have you just been passing the time with me? Something temporary before you go back to being who they want you to be. Her eyes flashed, hurt mixing with frustration. It's not like that. Then what is it? I demanded. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her fists clenched at her sides, as if she was holding back words too dangerous to let slip. Finally, she looked away, her voice low. I can't give you what you're looking for, Sophia. Not now. Maybe not ever. The words sliced through me like a blade. I stared at her, unable to reconcile the woman, who had held my hand under the moonlight, with the officer now retreating behind her walls. So everything you said, the way you looked at me, was that all just a mistake? She flinched, her lips parting, but no answer came. Instead, she turned, as though walking away was easier than telling me the truth. The silence she left behind was deafening. For the next few days, I felt hollow. I replayed every moment we'd shared, searching for signs I had missed, wondering if I had been foolish enough to mistake loneliness for love, comfort for connection. The inn felt colder, the streets less welcoming. Even the river, once my solace, seemed to mock me with its endless, unbothered flow. And yet, despite the ache, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Because I had seen it, that flicker in her eyes, the war inside her. She wasn't pushing me away because she didn't feel anything. She was pushing me away because she felt too much. Because she was bound by something I couldn't touch, duty, family, the invisible chains that had been tightening around her for years. But knowing that didn't make it hurt less. One evening, I caught sight of her on patrol again. Her back was straight, her face calm, her presence commanding. To anyone else, she looked unshakable. But I knew better. I had glimpsed the cracks, the woman behind the uniform. And it was precisely because I knew that woman existed that her distance broke me more than I could admit. For the first time since I'd begun my journey, I felt the urge to leave, not because I was running from something, but because I couldn't bear staying in a place where my heart had been both awakened and silenced in the same breath. Still, as I packed my things that night, the small, stubborn voice inside me whispered that this wasn't the end. Not yet. The storm between us was far from over. The decision to leave wasn't sudden, though it felt like it came crashing down on me all at once. I had spent the last few days packing in silence, folding clothes into neat stacks, as though tiredness might tame the storm inside my chest. Each time I looked at the little trinkets I'd picked up in this town, the woven bracelet from the market, the dried flowers pressed between my journal pages, I felt the sting of loss. Not of the place, but of the person I had come to know here. Anaya. Or perhaps I should say the version of Anaya, who had let her guard slip long enough for me to touch her heart. Because the other version, the dutiful daughter, the unyielding officer, had taken her place again, and it left me no choice but to walk away before I drowned in the ache of what might have been. The morning I left, the sky was heavy with grey clouds. It suited me. The bus stop lay just beyond the last checkpoint out of town, and I walked with my bag slung over my shoulder, each step like lead. My heart whispered for me to turn back, but my pride kept me moving forward. And then, there she was. Anaya stood at the checkpoint, in her uniform once more, a silent figure against the restless sky. My stomach tightened. Fate has a cruel sense of humor, I thought bitterly. Of all the people to see me off, it had to be her. Papers, she said when I reached her, her voice firm, but her eyes betrayed her. I handed them over, unable to meet her gaze. My fingers trembled slightly, but I hid them inside my coat pocket. All I wanted was for this moment to pass quickly, cleanly, like ripping off a bandage. But she didn't hand the papers back. Instead, she held them in her hand, unmoving, watching me. Sophia, she said, my name breaking from her lips in a tone so different, so fragile, that I froze. Something in me cracked. Please, Anaya. Don't make this harder. I have to, she whispered. Because if you leave now without knowing the truth, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Her words stopped me cold. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to hers, and what I saw there stole the breath from my lungs. Vulnerability. Fear. Longing. The first day I stopped you, she said, her voice low but steady, it wasn't just duty. Yes, I was doing my job. But the truth is, I noticed you. I noticed the way your eyes carried more than you wanted anyone to see. I should have searched your bags and let you go. Instead, I searched for an excuse to keep you there. To stay close. My throat tightened. I tried to speak, but the words tangled inside me. I've been trained to uphold rules, to protect borders, to follow orders without question. But when it came to you, her voice cracked, just slightly, before she steadied herself. When it came to you, I couldn't follow any of them. Tears blurred my vision. I shook my head, half in disbelief. Then why push me away? Why make me feel like I was just, my voice broke. Just a mistake. Her shoulders dropped, and she stepped closer. Because I was afraid. All my life, I've carried the weight of expectations. My parents, my duty, this uniform, it defines me. And then you appeared, Sophia. You made me want more than I'm allowed to have. That terrified me. Her hand hovered between us, trembling slightly before she finally let it fall against mine. The warmth of her touch shattered the last of my defenses. I thought pushing you away would protect us both, she whispered. But all it did was tear me apart. A sob escaped me, quiet but unstoppable. 4 days I had been carrying the weight of goodbye, and now, in one breath, she was pulling it out of me. I squeezed her hand, holding on as though I might slip away without it. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? How much I wanted to believe in you." Her eyes glistened, and she shook her head. "I know. And I'm sorry. But if you still feel even a fraction of what I feel for you, please, don't go. Stay. Or at least, let me stay with you, in whatever way I can." The storm inside me broke wide open. I didn't think, didn't reason. I stepped into her arms, and the world fell away. Her embrace was firm, desperate, as though she too had been holding her breath all this time, waiting for the chance to exhale. When our foreheads touched, the silence between us was louder than any declaration. And then, softly, like a promise, she said, "You were never a mistake. You're the only thing that's ever felt real." The bus rumbled in the distance, pulling into the stop. But I no longer cared. The checkpoint that once divided us had become the place where we finally met without walls. And in her arms, I realized, sometimes fate doesn't just twist to hurt us. Sometimes it twists to bring us exactly where we are meant to be. The bus hissed to a halt behind me, its doors creaking open, inviting me into the silence I had planned for myself. For a moment, I almost moved toward it, toward the safety of leaving, of not risking more pain. But then Anaya's hand tightened around mine. That simple gesture held more than words ever could. It said stay. It said I'm here. I turned back to her, and for the first time, I saw not the officer in uniform, not the woman bound by rules and duty, but simply Anaya, the one who had let me see her cracks, her fears, her truth. My heart made the choice before my mind even caught up. I was supposed to leave everything behind, I whispered, voice trembling. But then I couldn't finish. My throat ached with emotion. Her eyes softened, and she reached up to brush a tear from my cheek. "Then let me give you a reason to stay." The kiss came slowly, hesitantly, as though we were both afraid the world might shatter if we allowed ourselves this moment. But when her lips touched mine, it wasn't fragile at all, it was fierce, grounding, real. I melted into her, my hands clutching her uniform, as though holding on to her might steady the spinning earth. When we pulled back, our foreheads rested together, breaths mingling. "No more running," she murmured. "No more hiding." A shaky laugh slipped from me, half a sob, half joy. "And no more checkpoints," I added softly. She smiled then, a rare, unguarded smile that made my chest tighten. "Only the kind we create together." The bus doors closed with a metallic clang, pulling away without me. And instead of regret, all I felt was peace. I hadn't lost my escape. I had found my home. The road stretched ahead, uncertain and unpaved, but in her arms, the fear of the unknown faded. My trip, meant to drown out loneliness, had given me something I never expected, love. And as we stood at that checkpoint, holding on to each other, I realized something profound. Life's most unexpected detours often lead us exactly where we belong. Sometimes, love doesn't wait at the destination. Sometimes, it finds you at the checkpoint.